Well, hello there. I'm Senator Becky Beard here with the Montana Majority Report today, and we've got a very important issue to talk about today: public funding for education, using your tax dollars to fund getting our kids in the state of Montana educated. And this is quite a complicated topic. Therefore, I have the infamous or famous Kendall Cotton here to help talk about this today. And just a little bit of background, I started in the legislature in 2017 and was immediately put on the Education Committee over in the House. And I missed one session on education, but now I'm back in the Senate Education Committee. I also serve on Tax Committee and local government. So they all kind of point to this issue in trying to understand how we are paying for our education in the state of Montana.
Ready, set, showtime. Welcome to the Montana Majority Report. Quick, transparent, and informative. Get the inside scoop on policies, people, and decisions shaping our state, all in less time than it takes to pour your morning coffee. Stay tuned. Montana starts right here.
I appreciate you having me. I'm happy to be here, and this is an important topic that we definitely do need to talk about. We're going to have a lot of conversations during the interim about this because school funding is up for study over the next 2 years, and so this is one of the most important issue areas that Montanans need to be following. This is definitely important to the legislature. And I guess I'll introduce myself. So I'm Kendall Cotton, and I founded the Frontier Institute. We're a free market think tank based right here in Helena, Montana. I founded the Frontier Institute, just over 4 years ago at this point. So, yeah, it's gone fast. But we work on economic freedom-related policy issues. We're focused on state and local level policy. Our mission is to keep Montanans free to build, create, or innovate, whether that's on a really big scale like natural resource development or on a really small scale, like a homeschool mom who just wants to develop the best curriculum possible for her kid. So that's what we're all about, and we're excited to talk about education here.
Well, Kendall, when I was being on the tax committees and being out on the doors, and everybody is so upset about their property tax levels that they're paying, digging into it just a little bit, most people don't realize that over half of their property taxes goes to fund education in the state of Montana. And we say, how? Where does that money go? Well, I called OPI back in the day, probably 2020, and said, would you give me a tutorial on education for dummies or education funding for dummies? They sent me out a 300-page spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet that had the detailed dollars that they deal with to get out to the local governments across the state of Montana, to apportion $3.57 that came into this fund for this county. And the dollars are from minuscule to tens of thousands of dollars. And I thought, okay, who's watching this? And then where is this money coming from? So I distilled it down into, just a 20-page report, but it blows your mind, and OPI is dealing with that on their end. But we here at the legislature have to make sure that we're addressing the constitutional requirements, the how-highs of the Constitution, and then take that money and make it fair and equitable across the state of Montana. So you mentioned that decennial study that we're getting ready to do. So what do you think our focus should be on that?
Well, the big problem with public school funding in Montana right now is that increased funding is not translating into better student outcomes. So we're spending more per student than ever before, but we're not getting good outcomes. And in fact, outcomes are decreasing or declining. Over the last decade, we've seen reading and math scores go down while funding has gone up. It's just a hair over inflation. So it's gone up about 36% in the last decade. And, meanwhile, public school enrollment has stayed flat. So we're not, educating a lot more kids that you'd expect, more funding to accommodate. So we have more funding per kid than ever before in the system, but outcomes are going down. That's the fundamental problem that we need to address. And I think that really we see kind of three big issues in the school funding space that's leading to this problem that I just outlined. First is that there's a lack of accountability in the school funding system that holds schools accountable for actually delivering results for students. I think number two is that, as you've alluded to, 20 pages is about what you could distill it down to. Our school funding formula is extremely complicated. And the complication doesn't just frustrate lawmakers. It also leads to a lack of transparency for the taxpayer, but it also is a big impediment to bottom-up accountability, allowing parents to, if they don't like the services or the results they're getting in their local school, to transfer to another public school that serves their needs better. That funding complexity is a big impediment to, that's what we call public school choice. And then, the third issue is that really at the base of this all, we have a system that's built off of assigning kids to a local school based on where they live. And that's not necessarily the right way to do things. So happy to talk about each of those areas.
Yeah, well, we have, different ways to educate our children, and we've been focusing on that a lot over the last few sessions. The main priority is to make sure that we don't have any students, any of our children falling through the cracks. And a lot of parents are unsatisfied or totally dissatisfied with the public school model and want to have more control over their children as parents, to control what is talked about in the classroom. We're all for reading, writing, and arithmetic and science. We love that, to see our children excel at that. But some of these social issues and the indoctrination, social engineering that we've heard about for decades now, we're starting to see that. And the reason we see that now is because we had COVID happen in the state of Montana and a lot of online learning, and parents would walk by their children's computers during classroom time and saying, "What are you learning? What are you doing there?" So we're learning that. And I also, before we get back to the modeling, I was talking to one of my superintendents over in a Western county, and he pointed out that the things we used to focus on teaching our children back, 60 years ago was the basics. And now we've expanded it to things that we don't even recognize as being part of a curriculum in our school systems for K through 12.
Right. Yeah, I think that was Superintendent Hedelin's, campaign motto was back to basics. And in a lot of ways, that's absolutely what we should be focused on. Getting back to math and reading and phonics instruction, for instance, away from kind of this Common Core instructional approach that we've had for a long time. We need to get back to basics. And I think that there are opportunities to redesign the school funding structure to focus on incentivizing schools to get back to those basics and to focus on investing the money into high quality instructions for students that's going to lead to better outcomes. That's one reason my organization, we've supported the STARS Act that's up this legislative session from Representative Jones. It's a big bill, but really what it does is it's a departure from the existing funding model, which is we're going to give an inflationary increase to public schools every year, regardless of what kind of results we get. And instead, the STARS Act, what we really like about it is that it's a performance model. So if the school doesn't perform, they don't get the extra money. And we think that provides an incentive for them to actually perform better for students. And this solves a big problem in terms of accountability that we've outlined. We've tracked where the money's going in the school, in the public education system. And actually, since 2017, we've documented how the total share of public school funding in the system going towards buildings and going towards administration and kind of overhead has been increasing a lot. But the share of funding going towards instruction, meaning teachers in the classroom educating students, has actually been going down. So we're spending more on overhead and bureaucracy and less on high quality instruction. So that's a problem. We need to make sure that our schools are directing the money appropriately.
Okay, Kendall, tell us where you're finding pushback, though, on that, on the STARS Act. I mean, that's what people out in the faraway places from Helena across the state, they're not seeing the pushback because many of us want exactly what you said, but we're getting constitutional arguments and so forth. Tell us about what you've experienced.
Yeah, I think that there's generally just a skepticism. That's generally what I've heard, because I think a lot of people just are very frustrated with how school funding works in Montana. It is way too complicated, and we can talk about what makes it complicated as well a little bit later in our discussion. But I think that a lot of people looking at this say, why does it take, a 30-page bill to get our schools back to focusing on the basics and back to investing in high quality instruction? And I'll tell you, I mean, one of the things that I think is driving some of that pushback. I don't think it actually had any opponents in committee, but I'll tell you, in the background in the hallways, I think there's a lot of folks in kind of the education world who are nervous about it, because it's actually tightening the screws on the schools and saying, look, you have to be accountable for investing in starting teacher pay. You can't just be shoveling more money to the admin and shoveling more money to the longtime teachers, the tenured teachers there. You have to be investing in the next generation of teachers. And I think that a lot of people are kind of nervous about being held accountable, just because we haven't had that level of accountability in a long time. But it's needed. It's worth it. We need that top-down accountability. But in addition to that, we also need to allow for the kind of that bottom-up accountability, allowing parents to choose whatever public school fits them best.
Right. And I'll tell you, if we had more succinct a syllabus for the type of teaching that we want to have experienced in the classroom, we can distill for the teachers a less comprehensive and complicated teaching model, and get them focused more back onto the 3 R's, so to speak. And I think if they only had to be held accountable for that, they would thrive.
Right.
And the biggest thing that they're experiencing right now, our schools overall, is the money that we keep shoveling into the system is not reaching the classroom.
Right. And that's what we've seen in the data as well. It's not just, kind of somebody's anecdotal take on it. It's absolutely what's happening in the data if you look at the funding over time. And so let's talk about why school funding is so complex, though. I think that that's an important part to get into here. And I mentioned how the complexity really drives a lot of issues with accountability as well. And really, complexity is driven, one, by our Constitution. Montana's Constitution requires that the public schools in Montana be funded equitably. And so that means you have to really even out the spending that goes to each school. And the other dynamic that complicates it is that our schools are in a large way funded by local property tax dollars. And so when a student leaves or moves from one school to another, it makes it really difficult because the money's tied to the district. And it makes it requires all of these complex formulas and mathematical equations, literally, to get the money from this district to that district in an equitable way. And even that is not perfect as it currently stands.
Well, you're right. And when we have our staff with Legislative Fiscal Division come in and try to explain to us this really comprehensive budget formula, our staffer brings in a bucket and a bunch of blocks and sand to show us graphically how schools are funded. And we go from, well, we're required to put 10% here and 5% here and 80% here. And so the rest of the money we have to shush around like on a hockey ice rink, pushing it all back and forth to make it reach equitable and quality.
That's right.
And that's in the Constitution.
Yep.
But what do those words mean? Low-hanging fruit in the equitable, so we have to teach to the lowest common denominator, and quality is the baseline. So what do we do with these kids who want to excel, who can excel, who are chomping at the bit to excel?
Absolutely. Well, I think that one of the things that the legislature can do, and in fact, there's several proposals out there to kind of start us down this road, is to move to a statewide funding model for funding public education. So, I mentioned one of the complicating factors with equitable distribution of funding is that all the money's tied up in the local districts. And, as property values fluctuate or as a student leaves, as the student population decreases or increases, it makes it really complicated to maintain that constitutional mandate of equity. So one of the solutions would be to zoom out and to either collect the taxes for the local schools at the county level. That's one proposal from Representative Beatty this year. I think that's House Bill 156. And then House Bill 483 from Representative Sprunger is actually replacing some of these local property tax mills with the statewide property tax collections and buying down those local mills over time. And that makes that equation of how to get the money from here to there a lot easier to maintain equalization. And, over time, we think that if we move to a fully statewide funded model, then it removes this question of, okay, how do you equalize the funding completely? And it makes it a lot more simple for the money to flow in the system.
That's what we're looking for, is the
Right.
simplification. And I had a bill earlier this session to work on the 95 mills, because that's that over half of our property tax dollars that is going to fund schools. And I tried to do a bill to put a cap on it, but down the road we learned that there's another bill to do something similar and buy down property tax mills. So whichever way we go, I think we're going to achieve the same result, I hope.
Yeah.
But then I had another bill to start simplifying the tax equation so we can understand that better, and also put a little bit more definition and clarity on the quality and equitable.
Absolutely.
So that bill, I don't think is going to make it through the House. It came out of the Senate, but over in the House, people are scrutinizing it a little differently. And what I suggested during the hearing is, why don't we just include these data points in the decennial study? Because what I need to do, what we all need to do, is to be able to understand and explain the whole education funding formula.
Yeah, and I think maybe a way to summarize, what, kind of the motivation for your Senate bill, it's 215, right?
Yes.
That was that bill? Maybe a way to summarize what you were going for is, and this is definitely something that we agree with, is moving away. A way to characterize our current school funding system in Montana is it's school-centered. It's allocating the money based on each local school district. It's collecting the money there, and it's also saying that the state's going to give each school district a certain amount of money. Versus what I think that we should be getting to, which is a student-centered funding formula, where
Absolutely.
we're allocating money to students based on what they need and based on their characteristics. If they're a special needs student, they have different needs. And if we're allocating money to each individual student based on what they need, then the money's tied to the student, and it follows them wherever they go in the system.
I like that portability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but that also gets to a question of quality, what you're talking about, inadequacy.
Yeah.
And we really need, I think, over the next 2 years with the decennial study, I think that we should aim at a student-centered funding formula. That's where we should go towards. And with that's going to be a conversation about, okay, what does each student need to actually be successful? What is an adequate amount of funding to help each student get to the place where they have access to all the high-quality instruction that they need, depending on where they want to go with their career and their lives?
I think we do need to focus on the students, and I do believe that we have some disparities here, because some of our small rural districts in the state of Montana, they function on a lot less. They function with a lot less, and their budgets are phenomenally low. And then we have schools in the metropolitan areas who have a lot more students, but their per student funding is a lot higher. I don't know how, I want to find out how that is justified. Because in the smaller schools that I've been involved with, produce very intelligent, achievement-oriented students that go on to get higher education and excel. And I want to see what the foundational principle of that is and how we can carry it to other areas of the state.
I think that's great. And I think the other aspect too is that we can let parents make those choices as well. Parents can send the signals to say, well, this school isn't giving me what my student needs, so we need to move to a different school.
Yes.
And we need to facilitate and allow for that in a simple way that's not burdensome on the parent. And one of the things we pointed out is that right now our current system pits communities against each other. If a local district that has a student transfer out of it faces a property tax increase to be able to pay for tuition, that's going to just pit communities against each other instead of focusing on what really matters, which is the students. So we really should get back to that focus on the basics. What do students need? what actually is going to set them up for success later in life, and hopefully get the schools the proper incentives to make those choices with their budgets and with their local instructional decisions.
You summed it up perfectly, Kendall. Thank you.
Yep, good to be here.